There is a moment, in the gray hour before dawn breaks over the African savanna, when the world holds its breath. The acacia trees stand like dark sentinels against a sky bruised purple and orange, and the grass lies flat and silver with dew. Nothing moves. And then, from somewhere deep in the thorn bush, a sound rises that seems to belong to no single creature on earth. It is laughter, not the warm, rolling laughter of something joyful, but something older, stranger, more unsettling. A sound that has haunted the African night for millions of years. It is the call of the spotted hyena, and if you hear it in the dark, something in your gut tightens, without you knowing exactly why. If you have ever found yourself drawn into the secret lives of animals, the unexpected stories, the moments that science barely has words for, then stay with us. This is the kind of story that will change how you see the wild. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss a single one. What happened in the Laikipia Plateau of Kenya over the course of 72 hours was something that researchers who have spent decades studying both spotted hyenas and African wild dogs described as, in their own careful scientific language, deeply anomalous. One researcher, a woman who had logged over 4,000 hours of field observation across two species, said she had never seen anything like it. What she witnessed was this: a single African wild dog pup, barely 8 weeks old, found itself among a hyena clan, and for 3 days, that clan did not kill it. For 3 days, it lived among them, and then, on the 4th morning, everything changed. To understand why this story matters, you have to understand what these two animals are to each other. The African wild dog and the spotted hyena are not simply competitors. They are ancient enemies shaped by the same landscape, bound together by the same prey, and separated by one of the most deeply coded behavioral boundaries in all of carnivore biology. They do not share space willingly. They do not tolerate each other. The history between them is written in chases, in stolen kills, in the desperate sprinting of painted dogs fleeing clans twice their size. Wherever hyenas are numerous, wild dog packs suffer. The math is brutal and consistent. More hyenas means fewer pups surviving to adulthood. This is not a matter of occasional conflict. It is structural. It is foundational to how both species exist on the same piece of land. So when a wild dog pup enters hyena territory, the expected outcome takes approximately no time to arrive. The pup is investigated, identified, and killed. There is no deliberation. There is no hesitation. The clan is a hierarchy built on strength and need, and a wild dog pup represents neither a threat worth respecting nor a resource worth preserving. It is simply prey that smells wrong. Except that on this particular morning, in this particular place, that is not what happened at all. The pup was found by 2 adult females from the Olpeheta clan, a group of 23 hyenas that had been under continuous observation for just over 3 years. The researchers knew this clan intimately. They knew the matriarch, a large female they had designated OP Alpha, identifiable by a distinctive tear in her left ear and a scar along her flank from an old buffalo encounter. They knew the subadults, the juveniles, the adult males who occupied the lowest rungs of the clan's rigid social ladder. They had cataloged relationships, alliances, and grudges. They knew this clan the way you know a neighborhood you have lived in for years, where you understand not just who lives where, but why certain people never speak to each other, and which doors are always open. When the 2 adult females encountered the pup, one of the researchers was already in position, watching from a vehicle roughly 80 meters away. She described the moment in her field notes in plain, measured language, but anyone reading them understands the catch in the breath behind the words. The pup was alone. It was sitting in a patch of trampled grass near a dry stream bed. It was not moving. When the first hyena approached, the pup did not run. It made a sound. Now here is where things become extraordinary. Wild dog pups have a contact call. It is a soft, high-pitched sound, a kind of bell-like note, used between pups and adults within the pack to maintain cohesion, to signal distress, to ask for reassurance. It is not a universal distress signal. It is a species-specific call that, under normal circumstances, means something only to other wild dogs. But the pup produced this call as the hyena approached, and the hyena paused. She did not attack. She circled. She sniffed. She moved closer and then backed away, and then she sat down. The second female arrived minutes later. She behaved almost identically. Circled, sniffed, retreated slightly, sat. The researcher in the vehicle reported that her hands were shaking as she wrote. She had never seen a hyena sit down next to a wild dog pup. In 26 years of field research across 3 countries, she had never seen this. To understand what was happening neurologically and behaviorally, we need to step back and examine what a clan of spotted hyenas actually is, because most people carry a profoundly inaccurate image of the hyena in their minds. The popular image is of a skulking scavenger, cowardly and grotesque, a creature that lurks at the edges of other animals' triumphs and lives off the leavings of the lion. This image is wrong in almost every particular. Spotted hyenas are among the most sophisticated social mammals on the planet. Their clans are not loose aggregations, but tightly structured societies with ranked individuals, coalition politics, long-term memory for relationships, and behavioral flexibility that continues to surprise researchers who have dedicated their careers to understanding them. They are primarily hunters, not scavengers. The ratio of hunted to scavenged food in a wild hyena's diet is approximately the inverse of what most people believe. They are intelligent enough to solve multi-step cooperative problems. They communicate through a repertoire of vocalizations, postures, and scent signals of considerable complexity. The giggle, the whoop, the low groan are not random sounds. Each carries specific information about identity, status, urgency, and intent. When a hyena whoops at night, the other members of the clan can identify exactly who is calling. They know whether that individual is dominant or subordinate. They can assess, from the pattern of the call, whether the caller has made a kill, is in distress, or is simply maintaining contact. The matriarch of any hyena clan is not simply the largest or most aggressive female. She is also the most socially experienced, the most connected individual in a web of relationships that has taken years to build. Status in a hyena clan is inherited through the maternal line. A cub born to a high-ranking female enters the world already positioned above all adult males, and all females ranked below its mother. Social learning begins at the communal den almost immediately. Pups observe, they process, they remember. And here is the thing about the Olpaheta clan that makes what happened with the wild dog pup even more remarkable. The matriarch, OP Alpha, had lost a litter. 3 weeks before the pup appeared, she had given birth to 2 cubs at the communal den. Within 72 hours, both were dead. The researchers believe a flash flood compromised the den entrance and the cubs were lost. OP Alpha had been observed returning to the empty den repeatedly in the days following the loss, which is behavior documented in grieving mammals, from elephants to primates to, yes, hyenas. She was the first senior member of the clan to approach the pup after the 2 adult females had made their initial investigations. What she did next has been described, cautiously and with extensive qualification, by the research team as caregiving behavior. She approached the pup, she lowered her head. She sniffed it extensively, including around its muzzle and ears, which is a greeting and assessment behavior used between hyenas. The pup held still. It produced its contact call again, softer this time. OP Alpha did not bite, she did not snap. She did not display any of the threat behaviors that would normally accompany an encounter with a wild dog. Instead, she lay down approximately 1 meter from the pup. The pup moved toward her. Now, the researchers are very careful about what they say at this point. They are scientists. They resist the pull of anthropomorphic interpretation. They know that what they are seeing can be explained through several behavioral frameworks that do not require assigning anything like maternal emotion to OP Alpha. The pup's small size triggered proximity testing rather than attack. The contact call may have confused species recognition mechanisms. The pup's stillness and non-aggression may have activated what researchers call passive tolerance, a state in which a potential aggressor simply does not complete the threat to attack sequence because the triggering signals are absent or misaligned. All of these explanations are plausible. They have been written down and peer-reviewed and argued about in conference rooms and over field camp dinner tables. But one researcher, speaking informally rather than in published work, put it differently. She said, "When you watch OP Alpha with that pup, you are watching something happen that the hyena's nervous system was not necessarily designed to prevent." The pup spent the first night at the periphery of the communal den. The researchers parked at a careful distance and watched through night vision equipment. At no point during that first night did any member of the clan attempt to harm the pup. Several juveniles investigated it with what the notes describe as high interest and low aggression. It fed on something, the researchers believe a scrap of food near the den entrance. It slept. On the second day, OP Alpha was observed grooming the pup. Brief, perfunctory, but unmistakable. Her tongue moved across the pup's head and neck. The pup sat into it. The research team sat in silence in the vehicle. Nobody wrote anything for several minutes. One researcher later said that the moment felt almost intrusive to observe, as though they had stumbled onto something private. Then someone picked up a pen and started writing as fast as they could. The wild dog pup was a female. She was healthy enough, given her circumstances, though clearly stressed and underweight. Wild dogs are pack animals in one of the most absolute senses of that word. A pup of her age would normally never be alone. The pack cares for its young communally, with subordinate adults bringing food back to the den and regurgitating it, with individuals taking turns guarding the den against exactly the kinds of predators now surrounding her. For her to be alone meant something had happened to her pack. The researchers cross-referenced their wild dog monitoring data and identified the most likely source. A pack known in their records as the Northern Seven had been chased from its den site by the Olpeheta Hyena clan itself, approximately 5 days before the pup appeared. In the chaos of that chase, which had covered nearly 4 kilometers of broken terrain in under 20 minutes, it appears the pup was separated. She had been alone for some time before the 2 hyena females found her. Alone means something very specific to a social animal. It is not simply a physical state. It is a kind of unraveling, because the social fabric is the structure within which behavior makes sense, within which fear and hunger and warmth and safety are all organized. A pup separated from her pack at 8 weeks old is not just lost. She is operating without the scaffolding that makes her world legible. And so when she encountered the 2 hyena females and did not run, when she produced her contact call and sat still as they circled her, she may have been doing the only thing her nervous system had available. She may have been asking, in the only language she had, for the pack. And for 3 days, in the most improbable and haunting way, something answered. By the second evening, the pup was moving within the space around the den with a kind of fragile confidence. She was not integrated. She was not accepted in any formal sense. The other clan members continued to regard her with a mixture of curiosity and low-level wariness. Several younger hyenas, sub-adults in their second year, showed intermittent interest that escalated briefly into what might be called rough play, though the pup retreated quickly and was not pursued. The boundaries were unclear. The situation had no behavioral template in the clan's collective experience, and there is reason to believe that this ambiguity itself was part of what kept the pup alive. The clan did not know what to do with her, and so they defaulted to the behavioral option that required the least commitment. They waited. OP Alpha's behavior continued to be the central organizing fact of the situation. Because of the clan's strict hierarchy, her behavior toward the pup set the tone for the whole group's response. If the dominant female is not attacking the novel creature in the space, the lower-ranked individuals have a strong social reason not to attack it either. Aggression towards something the matriarch has apparently accepted carries social risk. To challenge the matriarch's implicit statement about the pup is to challenge the matriarch, and nobody in a hyena clan challenges the matriarch lightly. There is a temptation, when telling a story like this, to let it become something it is not. To let the warmth of 3 days of extraordinary tolerance overwhelm the harder knowledge of what surrounds it. But the wild is not a place of moral arcs and earned mercies. It does not trend toward kindness. What it offers, occasionally and without warning, is anomaly. A deviation from the pattern so striking that it illuminates the pattern by contrast, the way a single light in a dark room shows you how dark the room actually is. On the morning of the 4th day, something shifted. The researchers are not entirely certain what triggered it. There were several factors converging. A large portion of the clan had been away for most of the previous night on a hunt and returned before dawn, tired and fed but highly stimulated. The return of many individuals to the communal den area created a compression of the social space. There was more jostling, more greeting and displacement behavior, more overall arousal in the group. The pup, who had by now established a loose pattern of movement around the den, was in the wrong place when this compressed, stimulated group came flooding back. One of the returning females, a high-ranking individual designated OP3 in the research records, encountered the pup at close quarters. OP3 had not been among those who observed the initial tolerance events. Her relationship with the pup had not been mediated by OP Alpha's presence. She came in from the night's hunt, adrenaline still running in her system, and she encountered something small and wrong-smelling in the middle of her clan's territory. Her response was immediate. The pup ran. OP3 gave chase. What happened in the next 90 seconds was recorded by the researchers in detail, but is difficult to summarize without flattening it. It was loud. Several other clan members responded to the chase by joining it, which is a deeply ingrained hyena behavior. A chase creates participation. The sound of pursuit and the sound of a small animal in distress are powerful triggers in a social predator whose cooperative hunting depends on rapid mobilization. Within moments, several hyenas were involved. OP Alpha was at the den. The researchers watched to see if she would intervene. In the literature on hyena behavior, there are documented cases of dominant females intervening in aggression within the clan. It happens. It is not common, but it happens. OP Alpha did not intervene. Whether this was because the situation moved too quickly, because the behavioral context had shifted enough to override whatever had governed her behavior for the previous 3 days, because OP3's status within the hierarchy made intervention costly, or for reasons the researchers cannot access, they cannot say. She watched. She moved briefly in the direction of the commotion and then stopped. The pup reached the dry stream bed. She was fast, faster than the researchers expected given her size and condition. Wild dogs are built for endurance, not for explosive speed, but at 8 weeks old, fear is a significant amplifier. She went into the stream bed and turned along it, which was either instinct or luck, because the banks gave her some degree of cover and broke the line of pursuit. She made it to the thorn bush on the far side of the stream bed. The hyenas pulled up at the stream bed edge. The chase ended there. The researchers drove to the edge of the stream bed and searched for the pup for the rest of that morning and into the afternoon. They found tracks. They found a spot where something small had lain in the shade of a bush, flattening the grass. They did not find the pup. The story does not end with a reunion. It does not end with the Northern Seven pack, reconstituted and recovered from their forced displacement, picking up a familiar scent and following it to a thorn bush where a small female pup sat waiting. That is not how these things tend to end. The wild is indifferent to satisfying conclusions. But what happened across those 3 days is real, documented, observed, and recorded. It happened, and it asks a series of questions that the science is not yet fully equipped to answer. The first question is about recognition. What did the pup trigger in OP Alpha? The researchers believe the timing of the lost litter is significant. When a female mammal's hormonal and neurological systems are configured for pup rearing and the pups are suddenly gone, there is a period during which those systems remain active and searching. It has been documented in wolves, in lions, in primates. A female who has recently lost offspring may respond to the signals of young vulnerability in ways that transcend species boundaries under certain conditions. The conditions have to be unusual. The signals have to be unusual. On this morning, on this patch of savanna, they apparently were. The second question is about the contact call. The research team has since gone back and performed acoustic analysis on recordings of wild dog contact calls and compared them to the contact and reassurance calls of hyena cubs. There is no phonetic identity between them. They do not sound alike to a human ear. But several of their acoustic parameters, their frequency range, their temporal patterning, the rate of repetition under stress, show structural similarities that are not immediately obvious to a casual listener, but become apparent on spectroscopic analysis. Whether these similarities are meaningful to a hyena's auditory processing system, whether they activate anything like the neural response that a hyena cub's call would activate, remains unknown, but the researchers believe it is worth pursuing. The third question is perhaps the most unsettling, and it is the one that sits at the heart of this story. It is the question of what the 3 days of tolerance meant in terms of clan decision-making. Because the clan is not a simple organism, it is a society. It contains individuals with different ranks, different histories, different relationships to OP Alpha, and different personal histories of contact with wild dogs. The fact that 23 hyenas, minus those away on the hunt, maintained a more or less consistent posture of non-aggression toward the pup for 3 days is not simply a matter of OP Alpha broadcasting a signal and everyone receiving it. It involved individual after individual making an assessment and choosing, in whatever way animals choose, not to attack. The subadults chose not to. The adult males chose not to. The individuals who investigated the pup with high interest and clear predatory focus chose not to cross the threshold into actual attack. What does that tell us about the architecture of social behavior in a species we have too long dismissed as simple and driven only by appetite? There is a broader context to place this story in, and it is one that fundamentally changes how we think about both of these species and about the African landscape that shapes them. The African wild dog is one of the most endangered large carnivores in the world. This is a species that once ranged across virtually the entire African continent south of the Sahara, in packs that crossed thousands of kilometers of open habitat, that took prey as large as wildebeest and zebra through sheer cooperative stamina and coordinated pursuit. They are extraordinary hunters. Their success rate on hunts is significantly higher than that of lions, and considerably higher than that of hyenas. They are also devoted parents, deeply bonded pack members, and the owners of one of the most touching behavioral rituals in all of carnivore biology. When a wild dog pack returns from a successful hunt, those who stayed behind to guard the pups mob the returning hunters with a frenzied greeting that involves jumping, licking, tail waving, and high-pitched squealing that is essentially a coordinated begging display. The hunters regurgitate food. Everyone eats. The pups eat first. This is not merely touching to observe, it is functionally important. It is the mechanism by which a species with a relatively small litter size compared to, say, lions or hyenas compensates by maximizing the survival of every single pup born. The pack is the pup's life support system. Without the pack, a pup at 8 weeks old has almost no chance. And yet the wild dog has lost more than 80% of its historic range. Today, the total wild population is estimated at somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 individuals. The threats are multiple and interacting. Habitat fragmentation, human-wildlife conflict, disease transmission from domestic dogs, and road accidents all play their parts. But one of the most significant ongoing pressures on wild dog populations in areas where both species coexist is competition with spotted hyenas. Not simply competition for food, though that is real, but direct mortality. Hyenas kill wild dog pups. They destroy dens. They chase packs off territories, forcing movements that expose pups and adults alike to additional dangers. This is not malice. It is ecology. The hyena is operating according to the same logic that governs all large predators in competitive overlap zones. Reduce the competition. Protect the resource base. The fact that this logic is ruthless does not make it simple. It makes it thorough. And so when you place that pup in the Olpaheta clan's territory, and you watch what happens, you are watching two stories collide. You are watching the story of a species in serious trouble, a pup who represents not just herself, but a piece of a critically small and fragile total population. And you are watching the story of a species so sophisticated in its social behavior that it can produce, under the right conditions, a response that nobody predicted and nobody fully understands. There is a place in the Laikipia Plateau where the land drops away toward a seasonal river, and the ground is covered with a particular kind of fine grass that turns golden in the late afternoon. The researchers who observed the 3 days described in this story still return to that place. One of them said that she goes back not because she expects to find answers there, but because the landscape holds a particular quality in her mind now. It is the place where she had to revise something, where she had to set aside a version of the hyena she thought she knew and look at the actual animal standing in front of her. Science is full of these moments, the moments when the data does something the theory said it would not do, and you have to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, of holding the observation without yet having a framework to put it in. This is not a failure of science. It is the engine of science. It is how understanding moves. Let us go deeper into what we know about hyena social structure, because there are things happening inside a hyena clan that have direct bearing on this story, and that remain almost entirely invisible to a casual observer. The communal den is the organizing center of hyena clan life. It is where the cubs are raised, where social bonds are reinforced through greeting and play, where rank is negotiated constantly in the subtle choreography of who defers to whom and who gets access to what. Hyena cubs spend their first weeks of life in an inner den chamber, inaccessible to all adults except the mother. This exclusivity is not simply protective. It establishes the cub's identity within the clan's social register before the cub is physically capable of defending itself. By the time a cub emerges fully into clan social life, it has already been, in some sense, introduced. Everyone knows whose cub this is, and that knowledge carries rank information that will govern how every other individual in the clan treats that cub for the rest of its life. The spotted hyena's social intelligence is not incidental. It is the product of millions of years of selection pressure in an environment where success depends not just on physical capability, but on the ability to navigate extraordinarily complex social dynamics in real time. A hyena that cannot read the social situation, that cannot assess relationships, that cannot track coalitions and remember past interactions, will be outcompeted by hyenas that can. The result is an animal with cognitive capabilities that rival those of primates in several domains, including long-term memory for social relationships, the ability to reason about third-party relationships, and sophisticated understanding of social hierarchy. When OP Alpha approached that pup and lay down beside it, she was not acting outside her cognitive capacity. She was, in some sense, acting within it. She was assessing a novel situation and producing a response calibrated to what that situation appeared to demand. What made the situation so anomalous is that it appeared to demand something she had never been asked to produce before. The pup, for her part, was also operating at the edge of her behavioral envelope. Wild dog pups at 8 weeks are just beginning the phase of social development in which they start to map the boundaries of their world. Who is pack? Who is not pack? What is familiar? What is foreign? What the sounds of their own species mean, and what the sounds of everything else mean. She had not yet fully consolidated the behavioral distinctions that an older dog would have. Her world was still somewhat fluid, her responses still somewhat plastic. This plasticity may have saved her life for 3 days, and it may also have contributed to what ultimately ended those 3 days, because the clan's plasticity has limits, and those limits are set by the deep architecture of competition and threat recognition that no individual's behavior, however unexpected, can permanently override. On the day OP3 returned from the hunt and encountered the pup, the system reasserted itself. The knowledge that was temporarily suspended, or confused, or simply set aside by a set of circumstances so unusual that normal behavioral rules did not clearly apply, snapped back. The pup was a wild dog. This was hyena territory. The equations that govern life on the savanna are old, and they are powerful, and they do not stay suspended for long. But 3 days is not nothing. 3 days in the life of an 8-week-old pup is a significant portion of her total lived experience. 3 days in the ongoing record of hyena-wild dog interaction is a data point so rare that the researchers who witnessed it believe it may represent only the second or third time anything comparable has ever been documented, and the only time it has been observed with this level of detail and duration. The African savanna is a system of interlocking pressures, relationships, and adaptations built up over timescales that dwarf human comprehension. The grass is shaped by the grazers who eat it, and the grazers are shaped by the predators who hunt them, and the predators are shaped by each other, and all of it is shaped by rainfall, by soil, by seasonal fire, by the complex interplay of factors that ecologists spend entire careers trying to disentangle. Within this system, the relationships between large predators are among the most consequential and least understood dynamics. We know the broad outlines. We know that lions exclude hyenas from kills, that hyenas exclude wild dogs, that cheetahs operate in the spaces between, avoiding all of them. We know the ranking of competitive displacement and the rough mathematics of how it plays out across landscapes. What we know much less about is the within-species and between-species social complexity that operates beneath the surface of those broad patterns, the individual relationships, the specific histories, the moments of anomaly that the broad patterns never predict. This story is one of those moments. It began with a loss, OP Alpha's 2 cubs, dead in a flooded den. It continued with a separation, a wild dog pup cut off from her pack in the panic of a chase. It brought those 2 facts together in a patch of trampled grass near a dry stream bed at the precise moment when the behavioral conditions in the clan happened to be configured in a way that created, not safety exactly, but something close enough to a suspension of danger that a pup who should have been killed immediately was instead allowed to live. It lasted 3 days. It ended on a morning of compressed social arousal and unexpected encounter, with a chase and a stream bed and a thorn bush and a small set of tracks in the dust that the researchers followed for hours before they stopped. The spotted hyena has been on this continent for millions of years. It has survived changes that extinguished dozens of other species. It has outlasted the megafauna, adapted to the contraction of habitats, and persisted through waves of human pressure that have reduced so many of its competitors to fragments of their former selves. It is successful because it is flexible, intelligent, and socially capable of organizing collective behavior in response to unpredictable circumstances. The African wild dog has been here for millions of years too, though its path has been more precarious. It requires large territories, intact prey populations, and most critically, it requires the integrity of the pack. It is a species built around cooperation in a way that almost nothing else on Earth quite matches. It sacrifices individual advantage for group survival with a consistency that behavioral economists find remarkable. In a world that often seems organized around the principle that every individual is ultimately looking out only for itself, the wild dog is a standing argument for the power of collective commitment. These two species have been shaped by the same savanna, the same pressures, the same long history of competing for the same resources. And yet, for 72 hours, something happened between them that defied the patterns that history has produced, that opened, briefly and without resolution, a window into the depths of behavioral possibility in two animals we thought we understood. The window closed, the pup ran, the hyenas stopped at the stream bed. The researchers searched until late afternoon and then drove back to camp in silence. But the window opened, and that is the thing that stays with the researchers who were there. That is the thing that sends one of them back to that particular patch of golden grass in the late afternoon, where the light comes in low and the shadows run long across the ground and the world seems, for a moment, slightly larger than the theories we use to describe it. There is a second chapter to this story that is less about what happened in those 3 days and more about what those 3 days have since prompted. Because the observation, once documented and shared within the research community, opened a set of questions that several teams are now attempting to address. The acoustic analysis of the wild dog contact call and its structural similarities to hyena cub calls is ongoing. A separate team is examining historical records from long-running hyena research sites in the Serengeti and in Amboseli to see if any prior observations contain elements that might, in retrospect, suggest similar dynamics that were not fully recognized at the time. A behavioral ecologist at a European institution is working on a theoretical model to examine under what specific hormonal and social conditions a predator's species recognition to attack sequence might be inhibited by the signals of a different species' offspring. None of this work has produced conclusions yet. The questions are harder than they appear because animal behavior does not lend itself to clean experimental design in the field. You cannot reliably recreate the conditions that produce this observation. You cannot put a wild dog pup in a hyena territory and expect the same thing to happen, and even if you could, the ethics of doing so deliberately would be indefensible. So the researchers do what field researchers have always done. They observe. They wait. They accumulate data from situations they did not design and cannot control. They keep their notebooks open. What the current evidence does support, even in the absence of a complete theoretical account, is the broader claim that large social predators in Africa are behaviorally more complex and more variable than a strict ecological competition model would predict. The relationships between species are not simply adversarial. They are contextual. They depend on individual identities, on reproductive states, on social dynamics within groups, on the specific histories of specific animals in specific places. The system is more complicated than the model. It almost always is. For the wild dog, the complexity matters urgently. A species down to 6,000 or 7,000 individuals cannot afford for the complexity to work against it. Every pup lost is a fraction of a population that does not have fractions to spare. Every pack displaced is a ripple that runs outward through the genetics, the social knowledge, the territorial fabric of a species that needs all of those things to be intact in order to survive. Conservation efforts for African wild dogs have evolved considerably over the past 3 decades. Early approaches focused primarily on protecting individual animals and specific pack sites. More recent thinking recognizes that the wild dog's survival depends on landscape-level planning, on creating and maintaining corridors between protected areas, on managing the edge zones where packs encounter agricultural land, and the retaliatory killings that follow livestock predation. Translocation programs have been used to establish new packs in areas from which wild dogs had disappeared, with careful attention to the social complexity of the species. You cannot simply place 6 wild dogs in a new location and expect a functional pack to emerge. Social compatibility, genetic diversity, the presence of experienced hunters among the founding group, all of these factor into whether a translocation succeeds or fails. The hyena presents a different kind of conservation challenge, which is to say that at a population level, the spotted hyena is not currently in the kind of trouble the wild dog is in. It is widespread, adaptable, and capable of persisting in degraded and fragmented habitats where many large carnivores cannot. But it faces growing pressures. Persecution by humans in areas where it comes into contact with livestock is significant and frequently lethal. In parts of its range, hyenas are killed deliberately in large numbers, both because of livestock predation and because of a persistent cultural perception of the animal as sinister and destructive. This perception is old, deeply embedded in the folklore and religious traditions of many East and West African communities, and it is resistant to the kind of attitude shift that has been achieved in some areas for lions or for wild dogs. There is also the growing problem of the bushmeat trade, which reduces the prey base that both hyenas and wild dogs depend on, forcing larger predators into smaller territories and more direct and more frequent competitive encounters. When the prey base contracts, everyone loses, and they lose in ways that compound each other. Fewer prey means more intraspecific pressure within hyena clans, which means more aggressive assertion of territorial boundaries, which means more displacement of wild dog packs, which means more pup mortality in the displacement chaos. The Laikipia Plateau, where OP Alpha and her clan live, and where the northern 7-pack lost its pup, is one of the most important large carnivore habitats in Kenya. It is privately and communally owned ranch land, a mosaic of land uses that has been managed over the past several decades in ways that have allowed significant recovery of wildlife populations, including both hyenas and wild dogs. The coexistence of these species on the plateau is itself a conservation achievement, because it requires enough land and enough prey to absorb the competitive pressures without the wild dogs being pushed entirely out of viable territory. The researchers who work on the plateau are acutely aware that what they are observing is a system in a kind of delicate dynamic balance. The balance is maintained not by any single management intervention, but by the ongoing, imperfect, adaptive process of managing a complex landscape in which human interests and wildlife needs are constantly negotiating their respective boundaries. Into this balance, the story of OP Alpha and the pup inserts itself as a reminder that the wild is not a machine. It is not a set of fixed responses executing according to predictable rules. It is a living system, populated by individual animals with individual histories and individual cognitive and emotional capacities, and those individuals produce, from time to time, behavior that the system's own logic would seem to prohibit. The 3 days ended as they had to end, given the architecture of the competitive relationship between these two species and the specific circumstances of that fourth morning. But they happened. They are part of the record now. They are a data point in the long, slow accumulation of knowledge about what these animals are and what they are capable of. And somewhere in the thorn bush, south of the dry stream bed perhaps, a pup ran until she could not run anymore, and then she sat still and listened to the sounds of the savannah, parsing them the way her species has parsed them for millions of years, searching for the sound she knew best, the particular frequency and pattern of her own pack's voice, the sound of home. Whether she found it, we cannot say. The tracks ran out in the dust, as tracks always do, long before the story did. What we are left with is the observation itself, clean, documented, unresolved. An adult female hyena who had lost her own cubs, lying down beside a wild dog pup who had lost her pack, on a patch of trampled grass near a dry stream bed, in the golden light of an African morning.